Good day, mates. My name is Mordecai, and welcome back to the show, where a relatively new RPG story narrator has trouble coming up with a consistent introduction. I am incidentally fairly new to tabletop role-playing games as well, since my experience with games prior was entirely grounded in the realm of video games. Being a new participant in a hobby can be quite the daunting task. For this, let's imagine playing a roguelike video game, let's say Powder for the first time. Prior to me playing Powder for the first time, the most complex video game I had played up until that point in my life was Unreal Tournament 2004, and I will say that a fair comparison is impossible. Unreal Tournament handles extremely differently from Powder, and not just because everything plays out in real time in Unreal Tournament. And thus, when I played Powder for the first time, it being a turn-based game with a lot more options for how to control the character and interact with the world, at first it was rather overwhelming. So naturally, my first attempts at playing through Powder, my runs ended with me figuring out that I could pick up items by walking over them and pressing the E key. E, however, corresponds to eating, and this meant that I had quaffed a number of potions without picking them up for later. I have forgotten how many of my early playthroughs ended with my character quaffing a bottle of Greek fire. It is hilarious in hindsight for sure, not so much at the time. Of course, years of play and a lot of persistence later, I know the game inside and out. I can use the in-game mechanics to do possibly impressive tactics, such as trolling Den of the Drake, by resurrecting a dead red dragon, renaming it to Drake, and then proceeding to dominate the rest of the dungeon by making Drake the most overpowered dragon I can. Entirely with the game's mechanics. But asking a new player to do this? That to me sounds like a recipe for unmitigated disaster. It is possible, however you are far more likely to put said new player off of the game altogether. Today's story is about a new player being given a copy of the player's handbook, and being expected to be an instant expert overnight for a game session taking place the next day. Before we get started with the narration, if you like my content and want to see more of it, be sure to subscribe and like the video. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Enjoy! Let's hop into the often terrifying world of r/RPG horror stories. This story is titled, "You've never heard of D&D? That's okay, here's a PHP. We expect you to know everything by game time tomorrow," and is written by user Drebble. So, my first time playing D&D. A friend at work asked me if I wanted to play, and my response was, "What's D&D?" He explained the concept and had me come over on Saturday to roll out my character for a Sunday game that he would DM. On Saturday I show up and end up rolling a monk. He also loaned me a 3.5 player handbook so I could familiarise myself with how the game works that night and be ready for the game the next day. I show up for the game on Sunday and am treated like I'm some sort of rookie veteran player. I get heavy sighs and insulted for not having actions ready on my turn and not understanding how combat works, and was told that it was unacceptable that I had to borrow dice instead of bringing my own. I explained that it was my first time playing, and the response I got from that was that I had been given the player's handbook the night before, so I should know what I'm doing if I had bothered to read it. Let's pause for a moment. Being a new player to the hobby of tabletop role-playing games, whilst there are some things that the player's handbook can teach, it cannot teach everything, nor should it be expected to. If you have a new player at the table with no prior experience, other players in the DM should take some time to tutor the new player on how to play the game. It might be a bit clunky, but it's preferable to whatever this mess is. And remember, this is coming from someone who routinely set themselves on fire when they were playing through Powder for the first time. Let's get back to the story. Also, I couldn't ask anything out of character at all. There was no system for out-of-character conversation. keeping in mind that I had only learned of the existence of D&D like 3 days prior to this, so asking questions like, what is a bugbear? Or, which dice do I roll for persuasion? I would get in-character responses to these questions. You're a monk and don't know what a bugbear is? What kind of nonsense monastery did you train at? And why would you play with dice right now when we are trying to talk to the king? I also had my player agency taken from me at every turn, since I didn't know what I was doing. Here are 2 specific examples. The first example was that we open a chest with armor and weapons in it, and we're all told that we each take something from the chest. The DM goes around the table asking each player what they want. You wanted a 2-handed sword? Okay, here is a +1 greatsword, and here is your +1 studded leather, etc. He gets to me, the monk, who is wearing no armor and gets bonuses for not using weapons, and I tell him that no, I'm good. He then makes me take a weapon anyway despite my protests that I would never use it. Mine was a homebrew Tekogagi. I think I completely butchered the pronunciation on that. Ahem. And as a monk, I still had to take the penalties for using a weapon, so still doing less damage than I would be if I just was using my fists. After he gets all the way around the table, he says that the weapons and armor are all cursed, and that they are now our most prized possessions. We would rather die than part with our new items, and we would suffer damage anytime we have the chance to use the item and don't. Second time was that we ran into a something. I don't remember what she was and couldn't ask what she was anyway. I just remember that she was evil, very powerful, and apparently so hot that all we wanted to do was what she told us to because of how hot and powerful she... What the hell is this? Anyway, when she first walked up, she asked a question and I had to answer it. She ran up, smacked me because I dare talk to her without her specifically addressing me. So I'm like, nah. I'm pulling out this weird weapon and strapping it onto my hand. The DM then looks at me and says, no you don't. She can kill you in 1 turn. Just sit there and shut up and I'll tell you when you can do something. At the end of the first session, we have just enough experience to level up. We level up our characters and leave. I see him at work the next week and tell him that I don't think D&D is for me. His response was that everyone thought that I did great for my first time playing, and they were excited for me to come back and play again next weekend. I was shocked at this. And so, like most of the stories on the subreddit, I go back even though I really shouldn't have. At some point during that week, the DM does something rather silly at work. It was a very minor thing, I don't even remember what it was, but it was enough that me and a couple of the other guys at work joked with him about it. Again, it was nothing, and getting joked for minor things like this was normal amongst us at work, him included. So it wasn't like he was just being singled out for the purposes of being singled out. It was just normal workplace banter that he also takes part in when others screw up comically. I show up for the game on Sunday. We sit down and he asks me for my character sheet. I hand it over. He looks at it for about 30 seconds and then says, take your dex down from an 18 to a 16, taking your +4 to a +3. Also, subtract 500 experience, making you first level again. He hands me my character sheet back and watches me make the changes, while also walking through talking my character back down to level 1, subtracting HP, etc. After I finish, he looks me in the eye and says, maybe that will teach you not to run your mouth at work. He was watching for my reaction, so I just shrugged and said, okay. I could tell he was peeved off with me that I didn't get super upset about him messing around with my character. I didn't really care, because it didn't even really feel like my character at this point. It felt more like I was playing an NPC for him and his table to laugh at. My two examples of losing player agency above. The first example happened in the first session, and the second example happened in the second session. Shortly after the "just sit there and shut up and I'll tell you when you can do something," we took a break. I went out to my car and left. On the Monday, he told me it was messed up that I just left like that, and me not being there kinda messed up his encounters. So I was kicked from the group. I responded by joking about his work mess up the week prior. I made copies of my monk character sheet, and anytime he tried to joke to me about work after that, I would just give him a copy of the character sheet and ask him which stats to reduce. This actually got the attention of another co-worker, who I ended up playing D&D with, after a lot of convincing, and actually ended up enjoying the game. And that's where the story ends. I will admit that I'm glad the original poster managed to find a new game to play at. The original group and DM that he was with, I'm pretty sure that we can all agree that they are far from the ideal group to play with. From not tutoring the new player at the table on how to play, to railroading the party into a series of escalating traps, such as the cursed items and the encounter with what I can only assume was a demon of some description. And then treating the monk as a crude NPC, completely removing player agency from the equation. And then the final straw, of course, punishing the player in-game for out-of-game actions that have no bearing on the actual campaign. I think that we can all agree that it was pretty messed up for the DM to continually belittle the original poster by employing a rather crude form of metagaming. Now, losing stats or dying due to poor decision-making in-game can be fine, even somewhat funny, but losing stats for workplace banter and then being made fun of? That's definitely crossing a line. I can also safely say that the DM was definitely something of a control freak. And as a new player, the lesson I can learn from this story is to be aware of and pay attention to potential red flags at the table. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe and leave a like. It's free to do, and you can change your mind later. If you have any thoughts on this story or feedback on how it can improve, feel free to leave a comment. Again, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you all next time.